This will be an overview of existentialism, atheistic and theistic reflections on human existence. This is part one, atheistic existentialism. We've been reading Albert Camus and Myth of Sisyphus and Friedrich Nietzsche, Parable of a Madman, and these are two windows into atheistic existentialism. The next 15 minutes, I want to give you a brief overview of the positions that unite them as philosophers. Now, first things first, existentialism itself is a complex philosophy. It emphasizes the absurdity of reality and the human responsibility to make choices and accept the consequences. Those two attributes, emphasizing the absurdity of reality and human responsibility, makes up the heart of existentialism, which unites very complex thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Friedrich Nietzsche, etc. So keep those 2 points in mind. Now, we've been going over a number of worldviews: theism, deism, and naturalism. And atheistic existentialism actually holds several things in common with naturalism. Matter exists eternally. The universe is a closed system. History is a linear stream of events without purpose. And ethics relates to and comes from the decisions that people make alone, because there is no outside influence, because there is a closed system. Ethics itself must come from within the system. There is no outside standard which applies to everybody. However, existentialism makes a very critical distinction that naturalism doesn't. It makes the distinction between objective world and subjective world. Now, you know, the objective world is that which you can see, taste, measure, discover through logic. But the subjective world is that which is particular to you, the way you see the world, your tastes, your preferences. Now, I happen to love Thai food. I love curry. And the statement that curry is the best food in the world, of course, is subjective. It's related to my own preferences. And it's this world that the human being participates in, the subjective world of mind, of consciousness, of awareness, of freedom. Now, I want you to think right here. What's your first memory? Pause and think that over. Now, my first memory, when I was about 2 years old, was from the streets of New York and the smell of the pretzels being baked on the street corners by pretzel vendors. Something happens, says the existentialist, that when we are first born, we're born connected and dependent and so very needy on our mom and our community around us. But at some point in time, we become aware. We develop a consciousness, a freedom to make our own decisions. And this is a dawning, growing moment in our life. We exist, but then we become conscious, we become aware, and we become free to act. And it's that trajectory that the existentialists want to draw us into. We are free from the bonds of determinism, say the existentialists. Remember, one of the implications of naturalism is that if we're just a machine within the machine, how do we know that we're actually free to make choices that matter? Maybe everything is just determined. We are another link in that causal chain of cause and effect. But because of the subjective world, we get to create our own values within ourselves in the subjective realm, says the existentialist. So we get to make meaning. The world is presented to you, and you get to make of it what you want. Jean-Paul Sartre, another very important existentialist thinker, he famously said that man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Life is less about receiving it as a gift than it is about taking it and making meaning and crafting it and becoming a creator yourself. So one of our key worldview questions is, what does it mean to be human? And the fact of the matter is, you get to decide. Jean-Paul Sartre said, existence precedes essence. That is, you exist, but through acts of free will, you get to self-create the essence of who you are. You get the distinction. You exist, and you have no choice in your existence. But what you do have a choice over are your free actions of what you will make of your life. And that determines the essence of who you are. Existence precedes or comes before essence. And so there's something about emerging as a human being that's central to existentialism. Now, just want to note here, this is flipping the script around from classic Christian theism. What does it mean to be human for a Christian theist? Well, it means to be made in the image of God, which includes our rationality, our creative energies, um, and what it means to be human, of course, the essence of that is rooted in God. And then it's that very model, that image of God, that is birthed in our existence. Essence precedes existence in the Christian way of thinking. So the atheistic existentialists flip this around and put human free choice right at the center of all things. Now you might be saying, Mr. Dewey, who takes this stuff seriously? Well, obviously, some people do. Now, once you are self-conscious, you realize that you become sort of alienated from the world around you. That is to say that you have this deep desire to make choices that matter. Many of you have just made college choices or choices about your upcoming year. Those choices matter to you. You put a lot of energy and thought into making those choices, to make them freely. So we have this deep desire for internal subjective freedom to make decisions that matter for us. But these choices stand in stark contrasts, says the atheistic existentialist, to a universe that does not necessarily respond to our wishes. Now, this is the absurd. That on the subjective side, you have the freedom to make choices that matter, and in the objective world, we encounter a realm of existence that does not give us meaning. So it's a clash of two realms of the world, our subjective and objective worlds, which clash, and we are caught in that deep tension, which Sartre or Camus calls the absurd. Of course, the ultimate absurdity is that we will die, because it reduces us to simply an object in the material world. That part of us that the existentialists want to emphasize is the part of us that freely chooses, that crafts and makes meaning out of our life. And when you die, the subjective you dies too. And all that's left are your bones, and you'll decay. All that's left is you as an object in the objective world, not free to choose, just determined to decay. Maybe you've read Calvin and Hobbes. I don't understand this business about death. If we're just going to die, what's the point of living? And then notice these blank stares off into infinite nothing. It's one of the key questions, not only for existentialists, but I think for all people. What is the purpose of living? What happens to us when we die? For the Christian, what happens to us when we die is that we enter into life with God forever, or we are separated from God forever. That personality of ours, our consciousness, our awareness, continues. But for atheistic existentialism, that subjective existence is put out. So what do you do? in the face of a birth that you did not choose, in the face of the inevitability of death. We will all die. What do? Camus says, in the midst of this absurdity, of desiring meaning in a universe which cannot give it to us, what we do is we struggle. Maybe you'll remember this line from the myth of Sisyphus. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Well, I don't know that I can imagine him happy, but Camus certainly does. That Sisyphus is stuck pushing that rock up the hill only to see it tumble down again for eternity. And Camus imagines him happy. Why? Because he emphasizes human freedom, human choosing, and the consequences of that. You are free to make your own choices, and you are also free to bear the consequences. Sisyphus was a rascal. He trapped Hades. He once brought down to the underworld, got out. He was given a short reprieve and walked around the world and did not return to the underworld when called for. And ultimately, he stayed too long on the surface, and they caught him, and then they gave him this punishment. The gods thought they were punishing Sisyphus. Camus says he must be only happy because he's enduring the freedom of his own decisions. We search for value, we search for meaning in life. An authentic existence for Camus and others involves the recognition of the absurdity of the universe. But here's the deal. The objective world can give us no meaning. In our subjective realm, we desire it. And in that clash called the absurd, what do? Camus simply wants you to be a rebel. Rebel. And to rebel is to affirm your choice, to make decisions that matter. So then, ethics, or decisions in general, are good simply because you have consciously chosen them. Make a choice. Act. Use your freedom. That is simply the meaning of life, as you're stuck between the dual poles of a birth you did not choose and a death that will inevitably come to you. Nietzsche, aware of the absurd, he called it the abyss. And he said, when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss gazes into you. So staring into the absurd, recognizing the abyss, can be a deeply troubling reality. Remember, for Nietzsche, you have two choices. You can crumble or you can overcome. For Camus, you can struggle. But not everyone overcomes the abyss. This is a very famous image by Edvard Munch called The Scream. Munch came under the influence of a nihilist philosopher named Hans Jaeger. And maybe this image has something to do with nihilism, which for Nietzsche was crumbling as you look into the abyss. I was walking down the road, Munch wrote later, with two friends when the sun set. Suddenly, the sky turned as red as blood. I stopped and leaned against the fence, feeling unspeakably tired. Tongues of fire and blood stretched over the bluish-black fjord. My friends went on walking, while I lagged behind, shivering with fear. Then I heard the enormous, infinite scream of nature. This is what not overcoming the absurdity of existence looks like. So what does overcoming look like? For Camus, it is Sisyphus, the absurd hero, who continues to make the choice to push the rock. And in a system that looks meaningless, the meaning is found internally in that choice to go on, and also knowing that you are there because of choices that you freely made earlier. For Nietzsche, well, it's his Superman, isn't it? Of course, not the comic book hero Superman who has powers from another world, but simply the Ubermensch, the Overman, the Superman, the Overcomer, who looks into the abyss of meaninglessness and rises above, breaking the chains of nihilistic despair. Maybe in our own day, we have an example of overcoming the absurdity of the world through The Walking Dead television show and graphic novel. Zombies rule the world. Human beings try to stay alive. What is the point of it all? Well, who knows? You just make choices in the moment and you try to matter. That's atheistic existentialism in a nutshell. Not comprehensive, not complete, but hopefully hope for you that's it's a window into atheistic existentialism. Coming up, part 2, theistic existentialism.